when kindness creates unbreakable bonds. Marcus stared at his turkey sandwich like it held the answers to life's mysteries. It didn't. The bread was slightly stale, the lettuce had seen better days, and the mustard had been applied with the enthusiasm of someone who'd given up on joy. But it was lunch, and lunch was the only bright spot in his otherwise gray Tuesday Central Park, buzzed around him with the usual chaos of New York life. Joggers pounded past his bench, their faces set in expressions of determined misery. A businessman shouted into his phone about quarterly reports while power walking toward certain cardiac arrest. Somewhere behind the trees, a street musician played guitar with more passion than skill. Marcus took another bite and watched the world spin without him. At 32, he'd mastered the art of invisibility. His job at the accounting firm required him to be forgettably competent. His apartment needed him to be quietly reliable with rent. His life demanded nothing more than his continued existence, and he'd been delivering on that promise for years. That's when she appeared. At first, Marcus thought she was just another homeless person seeking shelter on the park benches. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her hair matted against her skull. She moved with the careful, pained steps of someone who'd been hurt recently. But something about her was different. Her posture suggested strength, despite her apparent weakness, and her eyes held an intelligence that seemed almost predatory. She sat 3 benches away, close enough to notice, but far enough to maintain the invisible barrier that city dwellers erected around their personal space. Marcus tried to return to his sandwich, but he kept glancing in her direction. She wasn't asking for money or bothering anyone. She just sat there, perfectly still, watching the world with those sharp, calculating eyes. When their gazes finally met, Marcus felt something strange happen in his chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition, like seeing a reflection of his own loneliness in another person. The woman was clearly hungry. Her cheeks were hollow, her lips cracked. She held herself with the rigid control of someone fighting off weakness. Marcus looked down at his mediocre sandwich, then back at her. Without overthinking it, he stood up and walked over. "Excuse me," he said, his voice smaller than he'd intended. "Are you hungry?" She tilted her head, studying him with those intense eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, something that made ordinary words sound musical and foreign. "I do not require your charity," she said carefully. "It's not charity," Marcus replied, surprising himself with his honesty. "I'm just eating alone, and sharing makes food taste better. Would you like half?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. Marcus broke the sandwich in half, making sure she got the larger piece. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed briefly. Her skin was surprisingly warm, almost fevered, and he noticed small scars along her knuckles that looked too precise to be accidental. She examined the sandwich like she was analyzing a complex equation. Then she took a bite, and her entire expression changed. Her eyes widened slightly, and she made a small sound that might have been pleasure or relief. Within minutes, the sandwich was gone. "Thank you," she said, and those 2 words carried more weight than Marcus had ever heard in such a simple phrase. "I'm Marcus," he offered. "Zara," she replied, then paused as if she'd said more than she intended. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Marcus finished his half of the sandwich while Zara watched the pigeons with the focus of a scientist studying a new species. When he finally stood to return to work, she spoke again. "The sharing of sustenance creates bonds," she said quietly. "You should know this." Marcus wasn't sure what she meant, but something in her tone made him pause. "Are you going to be all right out here?" Zara smiled, and for the first time she looked almost human. Almost. "I will manage," she said. "But Marcus, who shares food, you have honored me today." That evening, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. There had been something about Zara that nagged at his mind, like a word on the tip of his tongue that wouldn't quite form. Her way of speaking, the precision of her movements, even the way she'd eaten the sandwich like she was analyzing its molecular structure. He was still puzzling over it when he arrived at his apartment building and found his front door standing slightly open. Marcus lived in the kind of neighborhood where unlocked doors were invitations to disaster. His heart hammered as he pushed the door wider, expecting to find his meager possessions scattered across the floor. Instead, he found Zara sitting at his kitchen table, calmly drinking tea from his one good mug. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, though his voice came out more confused than angry. "Your lock is primitive," she said matter-of-factly. "Also, your building security consists of a broken camera and a door that doesn't properly latch." Marcus stared at her. In the light of his apartment, he could see details he'd missed in the park. Her clothes weren't just torn, they were slashed in precise patterns that suggested violence rather than wear. The dirt on her skin had an odd metallic quality to it, and her eyes, in the fluorescent kitchen light, seemed to hold flecks of color that shifted when she moved. "You can't just break into people's homes," he said weakly. "I did not break anything," Zara replied. "I entered carefully and made tea. Your hospitality customs are confusing." "That's not hospitality, that's burglary." Zara tilted her head considering this. "You shared food with me. By the laws of my people, this creates a bond of protection. I am now responsible for your safety." "What are you talking about?" She stood up, and Marcus noticed that despite appearing to be injured, she moved with fluid grace. "You offered sustenance to a stranger without expectation of return. This is a sacred act among the Ketharan people. It creates unbreakable bonds." "The what people?" Zara paused, as if realizing she'd said too much. "It doesn't matter what you call us. What matters is that you are now under my protection, whether you understand it or not." Marcus sat down heavily in his other kitchen chair. "Are you telling me you're not human?" For answer, Zara held up her hand. Her fingernails, which had appeared normal in the park, began to glow with a soft blue light. The scars on her knuckles pulsed with the same luminescence, and Marcus could see that they formed intricate patterns like circuitry beneath her skin. "I am Zara of the 3rd Battle Fleet," she said formally. "I am wounded, hunted, and far from home. Your kindness has bound our fates together." Marcus's rational mind tried to process this information and failed spectacularly. "You're an alien. I am Ketharan, and you, Marcus who shares food, are now my responsibility." Over the next hour, Zara explained what she could. She came from a world called Kethara, part of a galactic confederation that humans had never encountered. She'd been part of a military unit that had discovered corruption in their own ranks when she'd tried to report it. She'd been branded a traitor and hunted across 3 star systems. "I crashed near your city 7 days ago," she said. "I have been hiding, healing, waiting for pursuit to lose my trail. And now? Now they have found me, but you shared food with me, Marcus. By ancient law, your safety is tied to my honor. I cannot abandon you." As if summoned by her words, every electronic device in Marcus's apartment suddenly went silent. The refrigerator stopped humming. The digital clock blinked out. Even the streetlights visible through his window flickered and died. Zara was on her feet instantly, her entire posture shifting into something predatory and alert. The blue glow in her scars intensified, and Marcus could see that the patterns extended far beyond her hands, running up her arms and disappearing beneath her clothing. "They have found us," she said quietly. "The scanning pulse has disabled local electronics. We have perhaps 10 minutes before they arrive." "Who's arriving?" Marcus asked, but he was already moving, driven by an instinct he didn't understand. "My former commanders," Zara replied, moving to his window and peering through the blinds. "They will want to take me back for execution, and they will consider you a contaminated witness." The weight of his situation hit Marcus like a physical blow. By sharing a sandwich, he'd somehow entangled himself in an interstellar conflict. It should have been terrifying. Instead, looking at Zara as she prepared to defend him against enemies he couldn't imagine, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. He felt like he mattered. "What do we do?" he asked. Zara turned to him, and her smile was fierce and determined. "We make them remember why the Ketherans say that kindness is the strongest bond in the universe." Outside, the darkness began to move with shapes that didn't belong to Earth's sky. The hunt had begun. When two worlds collide for one human's safety. The darkness outside Marcus's window moved like liquid shadow, shapes that defied the normal patterns of night. Zara pressed herself against the wall beside the window, her glowing scars casting eerie blue patterns across the room. Marcus stood frozen in the center of his apartment, watching his ordinary life dissolve into something from a science fiction movie. "How many are there?" he whispered. "3 ships," Zara replied without taking her eyes from the window. "Small, hunter craft. Commander Voss likes to travel light when he's tracking fugitives." "Commander Voss, my former superior, the one who ordered my execution when I discovered he was selling military secrets to the Zephyrian Empire." Her voice carried bitter familiarity. "He trained me. I know how he thinks." A low thrumming filled the air, so deep Marcus felt it in his bones rather than heard it. The remaining battery-powered devices in his apartment began to flicker and die. His phone screen went black just as he reached for it. "They're jamming all frequencies," Zara explained. "Standard protocol for retrieving assets from primitive worlds." Primitive? Marcus felt a flicker of annoyance despite their dire situation. Zara glanced at him, and her expression softened slightly. "I did not mean offense. Your people have many strengths, but your technology is centuries behind ours." The thrumming grew louder, and suddenly Marcus's apartment was bathed in harsh white, light from above. Through the window, he could see a sleek craft hovering directly over the building, its hull reflecting the city lights like polished obsidian. "Marcus," Zara said, her voice taking on a formal tone, "I release you from the bond of protection. Run now while you still can. Tell no one what you have seen." "What are you talking about?" "The ritual was incomplete. You shared food unknowingly. I can break the connection and face Voss alone." Marcus stared at her. In the alien light streaming through his window, Zara looked both magnificent and terribly alone. The blue glow in her scars pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, and he could see the weight of her exhaustion, her pain, her resignation. "No," he said. "Marcus, you do not understand. Voss will kill you simply for witnessing this. Your only chance is to—" "I said no." Marcus surprised himself with the firmness in his voice. "You said sharing food creates bonds." "Maybe I didn't know the rules, but I knew what I was doing. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped. That's not something I want to take back." Zara stared at him with those shifting, alien eyes. "You would risk death for a stranger?" "You're not a stranger anymore," Marcus replied. "You're someone who broke into my apartment to protect me from space hunters. That makes you either completely insane or the best friend I've ever had." Despite everything, Zara smiled. Perhaps both. The light from above suddenly cut out, plunging them back into darkness. Marcus heard the soft whisper of something landing on his fire escape. Then another. Then a third. "They're here," Zara breathed. She moved away from the window, her posture shifting into something that reminded Marcus of a panther preparing to strike. The blue glow in her scars brightened, and he could see that the patterns covered more of her body than he'd realized, running down her arms and disappearing beneath her torn clothing like a network of living circuitry. "Stay behind me," she commanded. "No matter what happens, do not try to help. Your people are not built for this kind of conflict." The front door exploded inward with a sound like thunder. 3 figures stepped through the smoking wreckage, and Marcus's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. They looked like Zara, but wrong somehow. Taller, with the same luminescent scars but in different patterns. Their clothing was clearly military, made of materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And their eyes held a cold intelligence that made Marcus feel like prey. The leader stepped forward, and Marcus knew without being told that this was Commander Voss. He moved with absolute authority, his gaze sweeping the apartment before settling on Zara with something that might have been disappointment. "Zara of the 3rd Battle Fleet," he said, his voice carrying the same musical quality as hers, but with an edge like a blade. "You have led us quite a chase." "Commander," Zara replied, not moving from her protective stance in front of Marcus. "I should have known you would come personally. You always did enjoy hunting your former students." "Only the ones who betray everything they were taught." Voss's eyes flicked to Marcus, and the human felt a chill run down his spine. "I see you have contaminated a local. How unfortunate." "He is under my protection," Zara said firmly. "Your protection means nothing. You are a traitor and a fugitive. Your bonds are void." "The bond of shared sustenance cannot be voided by military decree," Zara replied. "You know this as well as I do." Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The ancient laws? You would hide behind children's stories?" "They are not stories," Zara said quietly. "They are the foundation of who we are. Or who we used to be before commanders like you forgot that honor means more than profit." One of the other hunters shifted impatiently. "Commander, we should simply eliminate both targets and return to base." "No," Voss said, raising a hand. "I want to understand what has happened here." He looked directly at Marcus. "Human, do you know what your companion is?" Marcus's mouth felt dry, but he managed to speak. "She's someone who needed help. She is a military asset of the Catharan Confederation, trained in 17 forms of combat and capable of killing you with her bare hands. She has stolen classified information and fled across 3 star systems to avoid execution. And you gave her food?" "I gave her half a sandwich," Marcus said. "She looked hungry." Voss stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned to Zara. "You bonded with this creature over processed meat and bread?" "I bonded with someone who showed kindness to a stranger," Zara replied. "Something you seem to have forgotten the meaning of." The commander's expression darkened. "Enough. Zara, you will come with us. The human will be processed as a contaminated witness." "Processed?" Marcus asked. "Memory erasure and disposal," one of the other hunters explained helpfully. "Standard procedure for primitive species exposure." Marcus felt his knees go weak. This was it, then. He was going to die because he'd shared his lunch. It seemed like a particularly unfair way for his unremarkable life to end. But Zara stepped forward, her scars blazing brighter. "You will not touch him." "You cannot fight all 3 of us," Voss said. "Surrender, and I will make his death quick." "I have a better proposal," Zara replied. "Trial by combat. Ancient law. You know you cannot refuse." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus could see the conflict on Voss's face, duty warring with something that might have been respect for tradition. "You invoke the old ways?" he asked finally. "I do. Single combat between us. If I win, Marcus goes free and unharmed. If you win, you have both of us." "Zara," Marcus whispered. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said without turning around. "This is what the bond means, Marcus. I would rather die protecting you than live knowing I abandoned you." Voss considered this. "Very well, but we fight by Catharan rules. To the death." "Agreed." The other hunters moved back, creating a circle, in Marcus's small living room. Voss began to remove equipment from his belt, setting aside weapons and devices until he stood armed only with his hands and his own glowing scars. Zara did the same, and Marcus realized for the first time how much she'd been hiding from him. Beneath her torn clothes, she was covered in scars that pulsed with blue energy, creating patterns that were both beautiful and terrifying. She moved like a dancer preparing for a deadly performance. "Begin," Voss commanded. They came together in a blur of motion that Marcus could barely follow. Zara was fast, but Voss was faster. Her strikes were precise, but his were devastating. They fought in silence except for the sound of flesh striking flesh and the occasional grunt of pain or effort. Marcus watched in fascination and horror as two beings from another world engaged in combat that was part martial arts, part dance, and part something he had no words for. Their glowing scars left trails of light in the air as they moved, creating patterns that seemed almost like writing. Voss landed a blow that sent Zara crashing into Marcus's kitchen table. She rolled aside just as the commander's fist shattered, the wood where her head had been. But the effort cost her. Marcus could see that she was slowing down, her movements becoming less fluid. She was losing. "Surrender!" Voss called out as Zara struggled to her feet. "You fought well, but you are wounded and exhausted. There is no shame in acknowledging defeat." Zara wiped blood from her mouth and smiled. "You taught me never to surrender, Commander. Perhaps you were a better teacher than you thought." She launched herself at him again, but this time her attack was different. Instead of trying to strike him, she grabbed his arm and used his own momentum to send him stumbling toward the window. Voss caught himself before he could crash through the glass, but the moment of imbalance was all Zara needed. She pressed something small and metallic into Marcus's hand. "Emergency beacon," she whispered. "When I give the signal, press the center." "What signal?" Marcus asked, but Zara was already moving again. This time, instead of attacking Voss, she turned toward the other two hunters. Her scars blazed so brightly that Marcus had to shield his eyes, and when the light faded, both hunters were unconscious on his floor. "Impossible," Voss breathed. "That technique should have killed you." "It will," Zara admitted, swaying on her feet. "But not immediately. Marcus, now." Marcus pressed the center of the device without hesitation. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the air in the center of the room began to shimmer, and a figure stepped through what appeared to be empty space. She was clearly Catharin, but older than the others, with silver hair and scars that glowed white instead of blue. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice carrying absolute authority. "High Commander Nira," Voss said, and Marcus could hear the shock in his voice. "How did you—" "I have been monitoring this situation since your ships entered Earth's atmosphere," the newcomer replied coldly. "Did you truly think you could invoke trial by combat without the High Command learning of it?" She looked around Marcus's destroyed apartment, taking in the unconscious hunters, the battle damage, and Zara's obvious exhaustion. Her gaze lingered on Marcus, who was still holding the beacon. "So," she said finally, "this is the human who formed a protection bond with one of our warriors." "It was an accident," Voss said quickly. "The primitive didn't know—" "Did you share food willingly?" Nira asked Marcus directly. "Yes," Marcus replied. "She looked hungry." "And when you learned what she was, did you attempt to break the bond?" Marcus glanced at Zara, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "No, she needed help. That doesn't change just because she's from somewhere else." Nira nodded slowly. "Interesting." She turned to Voss. "Commander, you are under arrest for violation of the Protection Accords, conducting unauthorized operations on a non-aligned world and attempting to murder a bonded pair." "Bonded pair?" Voss sputtered. "High Commander, surely you cannot be serious. The ancient laws are still law," Nira cut him off, "and will remain so as long as there are those who understand that our strength comes not from our weapons or our ships, but from our willingness to protect those who cannot protect themselves." She gestured, and Voss and the unconscious hunters were surrounded by the same shimmering effect that had brought her here. They vanished without a sound. "Now then," Nira said, turning back to Marcus and Zara. "We have much to discuss." What followed was the strangest conversation of Marcus's life. High Commander Nira explained that the Ketharan Confederation had been watching humanity for decades, waiting to see if they would develop into a species worthy of contact. The protection bond between Marcus and Zara, formed through simple kindness, had accelerated that timeline considerably. "Your people show promise," she told Marcus, "but they also show great capacity for violence and self-destruction. The bond you have formed with Zara suggests that humanity might be ready for a different kind of relationship with the galaxy." "What kind of relationship?" Marcus asked. "Partnership," Nira replied. "If you are willing." She offered Marcus a choice. He could have his memories erased and return to his ordinary life, none the worse for his experience. Or he could come with them, serve as humanity's first ambassador to the Ketharan Confederation, and help prepare his species for eventual contact with the greater galactic community. Marcus looked at Zara, who was watching him with those shifting alien eyes. She had risked everything to protect him. A stranger who had shared his lunch. She had been willing to die rather than abandon the bond they had formed. "If I go with you," he asked, "what happens to Zara?" "She will be honored as the warrior who discovered humanity's potential," Nira replied, "and she will remain bonded to you, if that is what you both choose." Marcus thought about his small apartment, his forgettable job, his invisible life. Then he thought about the vast galaxy waiting beyond Earth's sky, full of wonders and dangers he couldn't imagine. "I'll need to call in sick to work," he said. Zara's smile was like sunrise. As they prepared to leave, Nira handed Marcus a small device. "A communication beacon," she explained. "When humanity is ready for first contact, use it to call us. We will be waiting." "How will I know when they're ready?" Marcus asked. "You will know," Nira replied, "because you will help make them ready." They left through the same shimmer of light that had brought the High Commander, stepping out of Marcus's apartment and into a universe larger and stranger than he had ever dreamed. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that one of its children had just taken the first step toward the stars. In his pocket, Marcus carried a device that would one day change the course of human history. At his side walked an alien warrior who had become his protector, his friend, and his partner in the greatest adventure any human had ever undertaken. It had all started with half a sandwich, shared with a stranger in a park. Sometimes, Marcus reflected as they boarded their first interstellar transport, the smallest acts of kindness have the most extraordinary consequences.